Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. The idea of using martial law in a democratic society is a controversial one, and generally considered an option of last resort under extreme circumstances or duress. Under martial law, the authority of civilian government and law enforcement is suspended and taken over by the military. In recent world history, martial law has often been used for the suppression of political opposition, such as in Poland in 1981 by the Soviet Union, the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 in China, and the Iranian Green Movement of 2009. Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution states, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended, unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it." Habeas corpus means people may seek recourse to go before a judge and seek release from detainment unless lawful grounds are shown for their detainment. However, habeas corpus has been suspended a few times in U.S. history by the president during times of war. At the federal level, only the president has the authority to enact martial law, while governors only have the right to impose martial law within the borders of their respective states. There have been 3 instances during the first half of the 20th century where martial law was declared in the United States. In these cases, martial law was enacted specifically to provide either humanitarian aid after a disaster, enforce law and order to protect people and property during a civil disturbance, or protect U.S. citizens against foreign military attacks during World War II. These cases include immediately after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, during the 1934 West Coast Waterfront Strike, and after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. On April 18, 1906, an earthquake struck the coast of Northern California with an estimated 7.9 magnitude. The fire chief, Dennis T. Sullivan, died from injuries sustained during the earthquake, and in response to the resulting devastation and extensive fires raging throughout the city, the interim fire chief sent an urgent request for help to the Presidio, which was then a U.S. Army post. In response, General Frederick Funston decided to deploy federal troops. The troops patrolled the streets to discourage looting and aided the fire department by dynamiting buildings in the path of fires to demolish them. But the military occupation of San Francisco was short-lived, and by July 1, 1906, the Army had withdrawn from the city. During the 1934 West Coast Waterfront Strike, the longshoremen in every U.S. West Coast port walked out on May 9th in demand for better working conditions and higher pay. The work stoppage succeeded in delaying or stopping the movement of all goods by rail out of the ports. After almost 2 months of striking, the situation was extremely tense and volatile. On July 5th, police shot tear gas canisters into a crowd of striking protesters, but the picketers threw the canisters, along with rocks, back at the police. Events began spiraling out of control, with more violence leading to the deaths of 2 workers. The governor of California, Frank Marion, then ordered the California National Guard to move in that evening to patrol the waterfront and maintain order, while federal soldiers at the Presidio were placed on high alert. After 87 days, the strike was finally ended by the Labor Council, who voted to terminate the general strike while also recommending that the unions accept federal arbitration of all disputed issues. Perhaps the most famous case of U.S. martial law in recent history is after the December 7th Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. The naval base was attacked at 7:48 a.m. By 3:30 p.m., President Roosevelt had approved the territorial governor's plan to declare martial law. The martial law regime in Hawaii lasted for 3 years until October 24, 1944. This was primarily because Americans of Japanese descent accounted for 1/3 of the population in Hawaii, and it was deemed logistically impossible to imprison nearly 160,000 people in a small territory. However, martial law in Hawaii was basically a way of interning the Japanese American population in the territory, while continental states like California, Washington, Oregon, and Arizona sent their Japanese American populations to internment camps. In Hawaii under martial law, food and liquor sales, parking and traffic, and hospitals and emergency facilities were under the direct supervision of the Army. Even photography along the coasts was forbidden. Every person on the island, with the exception of children, was fingerprinted and issued identification papers they had to produce on demand. The Army imposed a strict curfew. Habeas corpus was suspended. The military took control of labor, and trial by jury was temporarily abolished. More than 2,000 people were arrested in the first 48 hours alone. All Japanese language schools were closed, and fishermen of Japanese descent could not put out to sea due to fear of espionage. Many Japanese Americans lost their jobs or were accused of capital crimes, sabotage, or other offenses, most of which were punishable by fines or imprisonment or both. During this time, the military collected more than $1 million in penalties during the war and imprisoned hundreds of civilians. After martial law in Hawaii ended, the consequences of that time under military rule remained in the population's memory and became a driving force for its eventual statehood on August 21, 1959. Martial law is an anathema to democratic societies in general and to the United States specifically. Even during the chaos of the January 6, 2021 incident in Washington, D.C., civilian authorities and police were reluctant to call in the National Guard, since the image of armed troops surrounding the Capitol was incongruous with a ceremony celebrating the peaceful transfer of power. However, eventually 26,000 National Guard troops were mobilized in the weeks after January 6th, and as many as 5,000 remained through March of that year due to ongoing security concerns. The debate continues as to whether the right calls were made or not on that day, while the bigger question of ever implementing martial law in a democratic nation during perilous circumstances remains.